Chapter 13. Summer had come to the Oran Ridge some 2 months after Ratapi arrived. Grass in every shade of green rippled in the wind beneath a blue crystal sky. Zancha's sphere rose easily, caught a westward breeze, and began the journey to Pincher. "Do you think this is going to work?" Ratapi asked when the cottage had disappeared into the folded foothills. She didn't answer. Ratapi gave her a sulky look, which she also ignored. Still sulking, he began rearranging their traveling gear. Zancha's head brushed the inner curve. Ratapi, who was a head plus taller, was at a much greater disadvantage. With a dramatic show of determination, he shoved the largest, heaviest box behind them and upholstered it with food sacks. Although his efforts made the sphere easier to maneuver, if he didn't settle down, Zancha thought she might finish the journey alone. "I don't think I've ever had the cushions up here before," she said, trying to be pleasant, hoping pleasantry would be enough to calm her companion. "I do what I can," he replied, still sulking. Ratapi had a flair for solving problems, which didn't seem to depend on the images he gleaned from Urza's weak stone eye. Even Urza had noticed it and made a point of discussing things with him that he'd never have mentioned to her. Zancha told herself that this was exactly what she'd wanted, an Urza who paid attention to the world around him. Of course, Urza thought he was talking to his long-dead brother, and Ratapi, though he played his part well, wanted more than conversation. These days, Ratapi's mind swam in the memories of a man who'd been Urza's peer in artifice. He'd absorbed all the theories of artifact creation, but as clever as he was with sacks and boxes, he was awkward at the work table. Perhaps if he'd been willing to start with simple things. But if Ratapi had the temperament for easy beginnings, the Weakstone probably would have ignored him, as it always had ignored Zancha. He'd tried pure magic where Zancha had been certain he would succeed. Urza always said that magic was rooted in the land. Ratapi's devotion to Pincher was the touchstone of his life, and magic often came both late and sudden into a mortal's life, but it wouldn't enter Ratapi's no matter how earnestly he invited it. The lowest blow, however, had come after he badgered Urza into concocting another cyst. Ratapi had gulped the lump without a heartbeat's hesitation and writhed in agony for 2 days before he let Urza dissolve it. One artifact poisoning wasn't enough. He tried twice more, until Urza, who knew somewhere in the fathomless depths of his being that Ratapi was an ordinary young man and not his brother, refused to brew up another one. "I don't mind doing the heavy work," Zancha said. The sphere was moving nicely on its own. She laid her hand on his arm. "I like the company, the friendship." Ratapi was more than a friend, though both of them were careful not to put the difference into words. The cottage had only 2 rooms. Her room had only 1 bed. The difference had come suddenly. One moment they were each alone, ignoring another rainy night. The next they were on the bed, sitting near each other, then touching. For warmth, he'd said, and Zancha had agreed, as if curiosity had never gotten into her to trouble before, as if she hadn't known the difference between curiosity and need and been coldly willing to take advantage of it. It had been awkward at first. Zancha was, as she'd warned, a Phyrexian newt, a vat-grown creature whose purpose had never been to love another or beget children. But Ratapi was nothing if not persistent in the face of challenge, and the problems, though inconvenient, had been surmounted without artifice or magic. He was satisfied. Zancha was surprised, astonished beyond all the words and all the languages she knew, to discover that being in love had nothing to do with being born. Ratapi laced his fingers through hers. "I could do more. You never made good on your threat to make me cook my own food." "There's only 1 hearth. I haven't had time to make another." "That's what I mean." Ratapi tightened his hand. "You do everything. Urza doesn't notice." "But I do. You're the one who makes the decisions." Zancha laughed. "You don't know Urza very well." "I wouldn't know him at all if you hadn't decided to bring me here. I wake up in the morning, for a few moments I think I'm back in Pincher with my family, and that it's all been a dream. I think about telling my little brother, then I look over at you." She made an unnecessary adjustment to the sphere's drift, an excuse to reclaim her hand. "Urza's coming back to life, letting go of his obsessions. That's your doing." Ratapi sighed. "I hadn't noticed." Ratapi, like Mishra, had a tendency to sulk. Zancha had reread the Antiquity Wars, looking for ways to buoy his spirits. She even asked Urza what could put an end to Ratapi or Mishra's black, self-defeating moods. "Silence," Urza had replied, had always been the best tactic when his brother sulked. Mishra couldn't bear to be ignored, Be patient, outwait him, and his quicksilver temper would find another target. Zancha had learned endurance without mastering patience. For the first time in 2.5 centuries, Urza's work table isn't covered with mountains. He's making artifacts again. Zancha thumped the box behind her. New artifacts, not the same gnats. He pays attention when you talk to him. Why do you think we're going to effing Pincher? To appease me, to keep me in my place? Zancha's temper rose. Don't be ridiculous. No? I've done what you wanted. He calls me Mishra and I answer. I listen to the weak stone and remember things I never lived, that no one should have lived. When you or he says that I'm so much like Mishra by Avahir's book, I want to go outside and smash my skull with a rock. It's no compliment to be compared with a cold-blooded murderer. And that's what they both are, Zancha. That's what they always were. They care more about things than people. But I don't do it because all I've got to replace everything I've lost is you. You asked me to be Mishra, so I am. All I've asked of Urza is that he care enough to send a few of his precious artifacts to effin' Pincher. He does. He has. We're taking these to Pincher City, aren't we? Admit it. You'd both rather be rooting around at Bazarat or Morvern. You've been down there, what, 7, 8 times? 6. And you could have come. The lines are clearer there. Urza recognizes the strategies. It's your war all over again, just smaller. Not my war, damn it! If I were going to fight a war, it wouldn't be in Bazarat or Morvern. Zancha made the sphere tumble and swerve, but those tricks no longer worked. Radapi had overcome his fear of the open sky. He kept his balance as easily as she did and knew perfectly well that she wasn't going to let them drop to the ground. You're wasting your time. Get rid of the Phyrexians in Bazarat or Morvern, and they'll keep on fighting each other. That's what they do. And Effins are so much better than Bazarati swine and Morvernish sheep. Or have I got that backward? Are the Bazarati the swine or the sheep? They're all pig keepers. Belatedly, Zancha clamped her teeth together and said nothing. She should have taken Urza's advice, hard as ignoring Rat was when they couldn't get more than a handspan apart. The sphere came around on 2 long tacks before he saw fit to speed again. Do you think it'll work? The same question he'd asked as they'd risen up from the cottage, but the whiny edge was gone from his voice. Zancha risked an honest answer. Maybe. The artifacts will work. They'll be our eyes and ears and noses in the walls. We'll find out where the Phyrexians are, and if we know that, maybe we'll be able to figure out what they're up to, what can be done to thwart them. We know they're in the Red Stripes, and we know the Red Stripes are doing the Shroud's dirty work. If there are any Shroud left, I want to get to Pincher City and get you into Avahir's temple. I want to know what kinds of oils you smell there. I want you in the palace, so I'll know what's happened to Dabarna. Has he become another Mishra? A man on the outside, a Phyrexian on the inside? Avahir's mercy. I was so certain Urza would listen when I said, "Brother, don't let the Phyrexians do to another man what they did to me." And what was his response? Pebbles! We're going to scatter pebbles, then come back. Who knows when, and see if any of the pebbles have changed color? Radapi took a breath and began speaking in a dead-on imitation of Urza. That way, I will know for certain if my enemies have come to Amphipitcher. Sometimes I'm not so sure he is Urza. Maybe he was once someone like me, then the Might Stone took over his life. Avahir, if a man's a murderer, what's the use of a conscience? During the war, the real Urza and the real Mishra both made hunter killers. None of this pebbles on the path wait and see nonsense. They went right after each other. Urza doesn't want to repeat his old mistakes. Waste not, want not. She was defending Urza with the very arguments that had infuriated her for a millennia. The situation in effin' Pincher is different. He's not sure what's going on, so he's being careful. And putting all his real efforts into Bazarat and Morver? Avahir! How many effin' villages have to burn before they're important? I wouldn't know, Zancha snarled. Dominaria is the only world he's ever come back to. Every place else, he's just walked off and left it to his fate. Urza may not be doing what you'd like him to do, but he is doing something. He listens to you, Radapi. He's never really listened to anyone before. You should be pleased with yourself. Not while my people are dying. Urza's got the power, Zancha, and the obligation to use it. Zancha was going to mutter something about men who put ideas first but resisted the impulse. Prickly silence persisted throughout the afternoon. She brought the sphere down with the sun. Radapi made an abortive attempt to help set up their camp, but they weren't ready to talk civilly to each other. Zancha banished him to nearby trees until she got the fire lit. The sky was radiant lavender before she went looking for her troublesome companion. Radapi had seated himself on the west-facing bole of a fallen tree, Zancha got no reaction as she approached and was rekindling her irritation when she realized his cheeks were wet. Complete Phyrexians didn't cry, but newts sometimes did, until they learned it didn't help. "Supper's on the fire." Ratipi started, realized he'd been weeping, and wiped his face roughly on his sleeve before meeting her eyes. "I'm not hungry. Still angry with me?" He turned west again. "The sea stars above the sun. The festival of fruits is over." A single yellow star shone in the lavender. "Berulu," she said, giving it the old Argivian name that Urza used. It would be another week before it rose high enough to be seen from the cottage. "I'm 18. Born folk, being mortal and having parents, and usually living their whole lives on a single world, kept close track of their ages." "Is that a significant age?" she asked politely. Some years were more important than others. Ratipi swallowed and spoke in a husky voice. "You and Urza don't live by any calendar. One day's the same as the next. There isn't any reason. I forgot my birthday. It must have been 3, maybe 4 days ago. Last year we were together. My mother roasted a duck, and my little brother gave me a honey cake that was full of sand. My father gave me a book, Supaloon's Philosophy. The Shraddha burnt it. For them, there's only one book, or wasn't the Shraddha, but the Red Stripes doing Shraddha work who burnt it. It got burnt. That's enough. Burnt and gone." Ratipi hid his face in his hands as memory got the better of him. "Go away." "You think about them?" "Go away," he repeated, then added, "Please." Urza's grief had hardened into obsession. Zancha understood obsession. Ratipi's flowed freely from his heart and mystified her. "I could roast a duck for you if I can find one. Will that help?" "Not now, Zancha. I know you care, but not now. Whatever you say, it only reminds me of what's gone." She retreated. "I'll be by the fire until it's good and truly dark. Then I will come back here. If you will not come down, this is wild country, Ratipi, and you're not—" The right word, the word that wouldn't offend him, failed to spring into her mind. "I'm not what? Not clever enough to take care of myself, not strong enough, not immortal or Phyrexian. You call me Ratipi now, and you say that you love me, but I'm still a slave, still rat." Agreeing with him would start a war. "Come down to the fire. I promise I will not say anything." Zancha kept her promise. It wasn't difficult. Ratipi wrapped himself in a blanket, curled up with his back to her. She couldn't easily count the nights she'd spent in silence and alone. None of them had seemed as long. When he stretched himself awake after dawn, Zancha waited for him to speak first. "I'm going into the palace when we get to Pincher." She'd hoped for a less inflammatory start to the day. "No, impossible. You agreed to stay at an inn with our supplies while I scattered Urza's pebbles in the places where we don't want to find Phyrexians. Your task is to help me find the Shraddha strongholds in the countryside once I'm done in the city. We need to know if there are any real Shraddha left." "I know, but I'm going to the palace, straight to Tabarna. If he's there, whether he's a man or something else. Every effin has the right to petition our king. If he's a man, I'll tell him the truth." Zancha planned her reply as she set aside a mug of cold tea. "And if he isn't?" She'd learned from Urza, truth and logic were worthless with madmen. It was always better to let them rant until they ran themselves down. Then they'll kill me, and you'll have to tell Urza what happened, and maybe then he'll do something." She grimaced into her tea. "That's a burden I don't want to carry. So let's assume you survive. Let's assume you're face-to-face with Tabarna. What truth will you tell your king?" I will tell him that Effins must stop killing. Effins. I'll tell him Tabarna that what the Red Stripes have done. Very bold, but with or without Phyrexians. Your king already knows what the Red Stripes are doing in the Shraddha's name." "He can't." Ratipi's voice trailed off. He'd seen too much in his short life to dismiss her out of hand. "He must." "Not Tabarna. He wouldn't. If he's still in Pincher City, if he's still a man, then he thinks what I thought, that it's all the Shraddha. He doesn't know the truth. He can't." Zancha sipped her tea. "All right, Rat, assume you're right. The king of Effin Pincher, a man like yourself, still sits on his throne. He doesn't know that there are Phyrexians among his red-striped guards. He doesn't know what those red-striped thugs have done. He doesn't know that, in all likelihood, the Shraddha were the first to be exterminated. If Tabarna doesn't know any of this exists, then who else in Effin Pincher does? And how has this nameless, faceless person kept your king in ignorance all these years? Ratapi's face tightened in uncomfortable silence. No. Not a denial, but a prayer. Not Tabarna. Best hope that Tabarna is skin stretched over metal. You'll hurt less when the time comes. If you're not fighting a man who sold his soul to Phyrexia. In the meantime, until I know where the Phyrexians are and who they are, we will rely on Urza's pebbles, and you will stay out of trouble and danger. Ratapi wasn't happy. He wasn't stupid either. After a slight nod, he busied himself by folding his blanket. The day's journey was easier and much quieter. Ratapi spent most of their time aloft, staring at the horizon. But there were no tears, and Xantcha let him be. Most of her journeys had been taken in silence, and though she'd quickly grown accustomed to Ratapi's company and conversation, old habits returned quickly. She brought them over the Pincher City walls in the darkness between moonset and sunrise 6 days later. The sky was clear, the streets were deserted, and the guards, they could see, were more interested in staying awake until the end of their watch than in the dark speck moving across the dark sky. Xantcha decided to risk a pass above the palace. Few things were as useful as a bird's-eye view of unfamiliar territory. A few slow-moving servants were at work in the courtyards, getting a jump on their chores before the sun rose. Sea breezes and frequent showers kept the coastal city livable in the summer, but the air was always moist, and if a person had the choice, work was easier done before dawn than in mid-afternoon. Xantcha was building a mini-map of the royal apartments, servant quarters, and bureaucratic halls when Ratapi tugged on her sleeve and drew her attention to the stables. His lips touched her hair as he whispered, "Trouble." 6 men, cloaked head to toe but otherwise unmarked, led their horses toward the postern gate, the palace's private gate. Probably it wasn't anything significant. Palaces throughout the multiverse had similarly placed gates because royal affairs sometimes required the sort of discretion that others might call deceit. But while it was still dark, they were in no danger of being seen. Xantcha wove her fingers in the sphere floated behind the men. The tide was out, exposing a narrow rocky spit between the ocean and the harbor. The not unpleasant tang of seaweed and saltwater mud permeated the sphere. Xantcha took a deep breath. No glistening oil. Whoever the 6 cloaked men were, they weren't Phyrexian. Messengers, she decided softly, and the sphere began to drift backward with the sea breeze. Follow them. They're nothing, Rat. They're trouble. I smell it. He knew she detected Phyrexians by scent. She knew his nose wasn't sensitive. You can't smell trouble, and you can't see it either. We've got to find an alley where we can set ourselves down without drawing a crowd. Xantcha, please, I just got a feeling about them. I want to know where they're going. I'll stay at the inn. I won't give you any hassles. Just follow them. No complaints when we're stuck hiding in a gully somewhere after sundown. Not a word. Not a sound or gesture either, she grumbled. But she shifted her hand and they scooted over the palace wall. Their quarry stayed along the shoreline, out of sight of the guards on the Pincher walls. Ratapi was likely right. They weren't up to any good, but that could mean almost anything, maybe even a meeting with the Shraddha. That would be worth knowing about, but she wasn't prepared for confrontation. We're not getting involved, Xantcha warned. They'd fallen far enough behind the 6 men that Xantcha wasn't worried about being overheard. She did worry about Sun. Dominaria wasn't a world where large man-made objects routinely whizzed through the sky. Urza's ornithopters, like Urza himself, were remembered mostly for their wrong-headedness. She'd followed men for days and never been noticed, but men who were, as Ratapi proclaimed, trouble, tended to look over their shoulder frequently and might notice a shadow where one shouldn't be. Not unless we have to. No unlesses, Rat. We're not getting involved. We've got more than we had when you sent me into a burning village. True enough. Since she knew there were Phyrexians loose in Pincher, Xantcha had fattened their arsenal with a variety of exploding artifacts and a pair of fire pots. Having protection wasn't the same as using it. She hadn't survived all these centuries by blundering into someone else's trouble. We're following them, that's all. In the very unlikely event that they're going to meet with a Phyrexian demon, I'll think about it. She thought about it as long as it took her to spin the sphere around and push it, with all of her might, toward the opposite horizon. Although Xantcha and Ratapi could still see the city walls, the riders had reached a point where they were beyond the Pincher guard's sight. Accordingly, they mounted and galloped their horses south. They're in a hurry, Ratapi said as Xantcha pushed the loaded sphere to its limit. I wonder where they're going. Not far, not at that speed. The laden sphere couldn't keep pace. They lost sight of the riders, but not the dust cloud their horses raised. Xantcha took the opportunity to tack behind them and be in the east with the sun when they caught up again. You said you would follow them, Radapi said as the sphere veered sunward. You said no complaints. If we were on their tails, we're on their sun side flank. It's safer, trust me. As expected, the horses slowed, the dust ebbed, and the sphere carried Zancha and Radapi close enough to see that the men had reined in at the grassy edge of an abandoned orchard, dismounted. That's odd, Zancha muttered. A warrior's sunrise ceremony? She'd seen far stranger traditions. Radapi had no ideas or comments. Perhaps he was feeling foolish or thinking about the long day ahead of him, hunkered down in a gully, forbidden by his honor to complain. Zancha tapped him on the shoulder. See that spot down there, on the grass? She pointed at a dark splotch in the west. Radapi nodded. That's our shadow. I want you to keep a watch on it, and if I get careless and it gets too close to those men, or especially their horses, I want you to tell me. We're going in for a closer look. I concede that you were right, and I'm a fool. Let's find some shade. The sun's just coming up, and I'm sweating already. Keep an eye on our shadow. Zancha kept the sun squarely on their backs, and as they floated closer, there was no real danger. She'd been seen elsewhere, even shot at with arrows and spears, none of which could pierce the sphere. Sorcerers were more of a problem, but sorcerers with the power to damage one of Urza's artifacts, were almost as easy to detect as Phyrexians, and rarer than Phyrexians in F and Pincher. As they approached hearing distance, Zancha reminded Radapi to be quiet and brought the sphere into the orchard nearest the men who were trampling the grass in a rough circle about 10 paces across. She didn't like what she saw. If you sincerely believe in your God, she said softly, start praying that I am wrong. What? She held a finger to his lips. Radapi wasn't successful with his prayers, or Avahir, the all-powerful elfin god, was listening elsewhere that morning. They hadn't hovered among the trees very long when one of the men pulled something black, shiny, and disc-shaped from his saddlebags. Zancha made a fist with her non-navigational hand and swore in the lilting language of the pink sky world where curses were considered art. Trouble? Radapi asked. The 6 men had each grabbed onto the disc and were beginning to stretch it across the trampled grass. Not the way she'd learned how to open an ambulator, but it had been nearly 2,000 years since she'd last seen one. Undoubtedly, there'd been changes. Big trouble. We're going to get involved. That's a passageway to Phyrexia that they're rolling out. Maybe they're going to visit the ineffable, but more likely, they're sleepers coming in, and we're going to stop them or die trying. You understand me? Zancha seized Radapi's shoulders and forced him to look at her. We either stop those men or you make damn sure you don't survive, because sleepers won't come through alone, and anything else that comes through that ambulator you don't ever want to meet. He went bloodless pale beneath his sweat, neither nodded nor spoke. Understand? What can I do? They're not watching their backs. If we're lucky, we can set up the fire pots. Then you keep dropping Urza's toys into them, one after another. Radapi nodded, and Zancha curled her fingers, raising the sphere slightly, then backing off to the far edge of the orchard. Out of sight of the 6 men, but well within the fire pot's range. She brought it down carefully. The thump of their supplies hitting the ground as the spheres collapsed wasn't loud enough to disturb the birds in the nearest trees. Zancha kissed Radapi once before she yawned out a layer of armor that would make affection pointless. The fire pots were tubes shaped roughly like men's boots, with their important difference that when Zancha unlaced them, their floton linings glowed. She aimed them from memory. Close would be good enough with the canisters they'd be using. After she piled the fist-sized canisters at Radapi's feet and dumped a pair, one filled with compressed naphtha, the other with glass shards, into the rapidly heating fire pots, she handed Radapi her smaller coin pouch. Anyone gets too close, don't bother with your sword. Just throw one of these at him and duck. Then the fire pots let loose. It was time to draw her sword and run. The Effins were sword-armed but not armored. Zancha planned to take one, maybe 2 of them by surprise, and hoped that the fire pots would do the same. But mostly she hoped that the Effins would abandon the ambulator before it spat out reinforcements. The first part of her plan went well. She met a man charging through the trees, struggling to draw his sword. Zancha slew him with a slide cut across the gut. It was loud and messy, but successful. 1 down, 5 to go. The fire pots, whose trajectory was more height than distance, delivered both of Urza's exploding artifacts within 20 paces of the ambulator. They'd spooked the horses. All 6 had torn free and bolted, but the naphtha had fallen beyond the black pool, and the glass hadn't disabled any of the 4 men. 2 still at work anchoring the ambulator, 2 with their swords drawn and coming after her, that Zancha could see. 2 more canisters came hissing out of the morning sunlight. 1 fell on the rippling pool and vanished before it exploded. No time to imagine where it might have gone or what it might accomplish when it arrived. The second spread more glass shards near the 2 men working on the portal's rim. If she survived, Zancha planned to tell Urza that glass shards weren't effective against Effens. Though bloodied and clearly in pain, the pair stayed put. 4 plus 1 was only 5. Zancha hoped Radipi remembered the coins. Then she put him out of her mind. The swordsmen positioned themselves between her and the other pair of Effens. She knew what they saw, an undersized youth with an undersized sword and no apparent armor. She knew how to take advantage of that misperception. Her arm trembled, the tip of her sword pointed at the ground, and then she ran at the nearer of the pair. He thought he could beat her attack aside with a simple parry. That was his last mistake. The other thought he had an easy stroke across the back of her neck. He struck hard enough to drop Zancha to one knee, but he'd been expecting more and failed to press what little advantage he had. Zancha pivoted on her knee, got her weight behind the hilt, and thrust the blade up through his stomach to his heart. She left her sword in the corpse and took up his instead. Of the 2 remaining Effens, one was on his knees, fussing with the ambulator, while the other stood guard over him. Black-on-black patterns flowed across the portal's surface. Zancha didn't dare run across it. She could smell Phyrexia as the Effen beat aside her first attack. He was the best of the men she'd faced so far, and respectful. He stayed calm and balanced behind his sword, not in any hurry. Zancha was in a hurry and led with her empty off-weapon hand, seizing his sword midway down the blade. It was a risky move. Urza's armor couldn't make her bigger or heavier than she naturally was. She couldn't always maintain her grip, and more than once she'd wound up with a dislocated shoulder. This time, surprise and luck were with her, at least long enough to plunge her sword into the swordsman's gut before she shoved him backward, off the blade, and into the black pool. She kicked the kneeling Effen in the chin, not a crippling, much less killing blow, except that he, too, fell backward into the now seething ambulator. 2 more exploding artifacts arrived. One was simply loud and hurled her backward, away from the ambulator, but still the last direction she wanted to move. The other was fire that spread evenly across the black surface. Zancha staggered back to the place where the last Effen had been kneeling, the place where she expected to find a palm-sized panel with 7 black jewels. The priests had changed the design. There was neither panel nor jewels. In their place, Zancha saw a smooth black stone, like Urza's magnifying lens, or like the ambulator itself. The fire still burnt, nothing had emerged. She brought her sword down on the stone. The sword shattered. The fire vanished as if someone had inhaled it, and the black-on-black patterns had turned silver. "Run, Radipi!" she shouted as loud as the armor permitted, and ignored her own advice. A Phyrexian emerged from the black pool moments later. It was a priest of some sort. There was too much metal, all of it articulated, for it to be anything less than a searcher. Definitely not the scrap-made tender or teacher Zancha had expected with a band of sleepers. It had a triangular head with faceted eyes, a bit like Urza's gemstone eyes, though large enough that she couldn't have covered one with splayed fingers. The design needed improvement. The priest raised a nozzle-tipped arm and exterminated a flying bird an instant after it was fully erupted, but ignored Zancha, who crouched unmoving some 3 paces from the ambulator's edge. The nozzle arm was also new to Zancha. She thought she'd seen a thin black thread reach out to the bird, but the attack had been so quick that she couldn't be sure of anything else except the bird had disappeared in a burst of red light. Nothing, not even a feather, had fallen from the sky. No doubt Zancha would find out exactly what it could do, and since the priest's arms were mismatched, what surprises lurked on its right side? Urza's armor had never failed. "Over here, meatling!" Few epithets would get a priest's attention quicker than calling it a newt. Zancha stood up, brandishing her broken sword. The nozzle weapon sent something very sharp, very hot at the hollow of Zancha's neck, and she felt as though it had come out through her spine. Urza's armor flashed a radiant cobalt blue, astonishing both her and the priest.
"What is your place?"
the priest demanded through mouthparts hidden within its triangle head. It was not an avenger, modeled after fleshy predators. It was, despite its weapons, a thinker, a planner. "Zancha!" The right arm came up and shot forth a segmented cable, the tip of which was a fast-spinning flower with razored petals. It struck Zancha's face. She felt bones give, but the flower took greater damage. Steel petals clattered to the ground, and pulses of glistening oil spurted from the still-spinning hub. Zancha struck quickly with the broken sword, enveloping the cable, and yanked hard. It had 2 metal legs and a top-heavy torso. In the Phyrexia she remembered, such bipedal priests had a tendency to topple. And it nearly did, though nearly was worse than not at all. Zancha had simply pulled it closer, and it lashed the severed cable of its right arm around her waist. It began using its metal arms as clubs. Zancha could neither retreat nor make good use of her sword. Her right elbow got clobbered and broken within the armor. She managed to get the sword free of the cable and transferred to her left hand before her right arm went numb within the armor. Zancha took the only stroke she had, a sideswipe at the priest's right eye. 2 more of Urza's canisters rained down. One was concussive. The other screamed so loud Zancha's ears hurt through the armor. Together, the canisters jarred something loose inside the priest. Glistening oil poured from the downward point of its triangle head. It struck one final time, another blow to her already mangled elbow. They truly had no imagination before it expired. He'd saved her life. Radapi, son of Medea, had saved her life. The damn fool either hadn't heard her shout or, most likely, had ignored it. Zancha writhered free of the cable. Numbness had spread up her right arm to her shoulder. She'd survive. Urza himself had said that a Phyrexian newt's ability to heal itself was nothing less than miraculous, but she wasn't looking forward to releasing the armor and wouldn't consider doing it until she dealt with the ambulator. She got down on her knees and cursed. New designs or no, the black pool in front of her was definitely the nether end of an ambulator, and unless she wanted to poke her head into Phyrexia to loosen the prime end, there was no way Zancha could destroy it completely. But she could make it very dangerous to use if she could get it rolled and find some way to break or reset the black lens. She had half the rim unanchored when yet another pair of canisters showered her with glass and fire. Enough already! She moved on to the next anchor. Radapi arrived moments later. Zancha! Stay away! She warned harshly. The pain was bearable, but numbness was making her groggy. She could have used help, but not from someone who was pure mortal flesh. It's not done. Not yet. I told you to run. Zancha realized she must look bad. Broken bones, bruising her face, her right arm, mangled and useless. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine in a couple of days. Just get away from here. More can come through. Even now, make yourself unnoticeable. I've got to create an inconvenience. I'll help. You'll hide. She popped another anchor. The pool rippled, black on black. Radapi retreated, but not far. She didn't have the strength to argue with him. There, by the priest, you'll see a little black glass circle thing. Don't touch it. Don't touch anything, but think about breaking that glass. Zancha crawled to the next anchor. Priest? Shraddha? No! She pointed at the heap of metal that had been the Phyrexia and went back to work on the anchor. Another 8 or 10 and she'd have it loose. Merciful Ava here. Zancha, what is it? Phyrexian, a priest. I don't know what kind. Something new since I left. That's what we're fighting. Except that's a priest and not a Phyrexian meant for fighting. Not like you, then? Zancha looked up. He was bent over, reaching out. I said don't touch it! He straightened. And I'm not a fighter. I'm not anything. A newt. Nothing started. Nothing completed. Just a newt. The 6th. I killed him. The last one. Myself. With those coins you left me. She hadn't heard the explosions. Well, there'd been other things on her mind. They called this a priest? They invited her here to effing pinch her? Big trouble, just like you said, and don't kid yourself. Assume they've got more ambulators. She remembered the upright disc in the Mog temple. Assume they've got worse. Assume that some of the sleepers are awake, that there are priests inside the palace, and that some of your own have been corrupted, starting with your king. Zancha released another anchor. Look at the glass, will you? My sword broke when I hit it. A moment or two of silence. She was down to her last 3 anchors when Radapi said, I got an idea, and ran into the trees. He came back with the fire pots and the rest of Urza's canisters. We can put it in one of the pots with the bangers. Put one pot on top of the other and let it rip. All the anchors were up, and Zancha had no better idea, except to send Radapi to the far end of the orchard before she followed his suggestions. Afterward, she remembered flying through the air and landing in a tree.